In 1988, co-creators Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura stood at a crossroads. Their most recent game, Dragon Quest III, had been a record-breaking success, but it had also been the culmination of their grand vision. At this point, they'd finally achieved all they set out to do when they first decided to make a role-playing game for the Famicom. They could continue to tread the same path, putting out bigger and better versions of the same experience the fans were screaming for. Instead, they chose a different direction. Dragon Quest IV would not be a safe iteration on the same familiar formula. It would be a product of wild ambitions, hugely innovative, full of crazy ideas, and well ahead of its time. This is my retrospective review of Dragon Quest IV, The Great Experiment. Dragon Quest IV was released on February 11, 1990, 2 years almost to the day since the launch of Dragon Quest III. That might not seem like a long development cycle by today's standards, but in the Famicom era, it was considered a massive undertaking. Planning for Dragon Quest IV began in January of 1988, about a month before the release of the third game. With development of Dragon Quest III done and nothing to do but wait for the cartridges to be manufactured, the team went straight back to work on the next title. Dragon Quest III had been the game Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura envisioned when they first started working on the series, a full-feature role-playing game for the Famicom. Now that they reached this milestone, the path forward was not as obvious. They certainly had plenty of ideas for things to add, but they were not content to simply iterate on the existing formula. Rapid technological advances in the late 80s meant that Dragon Quest IV would also have more resources at its disposal than ever before, an astounding 512 kilobytes of memory. With fewer constraints holding them back, the team was eager to pack the new title with as much material as possible. But Dragon Quest III's story had already been epic, and Horii felt that an even longer adventure would run the risk of boring the player. The answer came to him as he reflected on the previous game. In Dragon Quest III, you recruit your companions from a tavern called Louisa's Place. But these characters were created by you, blank slates without personalities or backgrounds to discover. Horii realized that here was something to work with. For Dragon Quest IV, he wanted to explore the lives of the hero's companions. Rather than tell a single, continuous story, the new game would be divided into chapters, each one focused on a different character. But for these companions to really come to life, they couldn't just blindly follow the player's orders. They had to have a mind of their own. And for this, Horii already had a design that just might work. Years earlier, he'd had an idea for a game where your partner is a robot that learns through trial and error. Over the course of the game, the player would use natural language to teach their AI partner how to respond to orders and how to act, resulting in a companion that grew smarter and smarter the longer you played. This concept was a bit outlandish for 1984, but now Horii saw an opportunity to make it a reality. These two ideas, a story divided into chapters featuring different protagonists and an AI system that would grant those characters self-determination, became the very bedrock upon which Dragon Quest IV would be built. As before, Yuji Horii would write the story and design the scenarios, while Nakamura served as director. Akira Toriyama would draw the monsters and provide character designs, and Koichi Sugiyama took charge of the game's soundtrack. But to bring a title this ambitious to market, they would need a larger team than ever before. Dragon Quest III had been made by a staff of around 20 people. This time, that number would be closer to 35. Because of the size and scope of the new challenge, the role of director now consumed so much of Nakamura's time that he would not be able to write a single line of code for the fourth title. Instead, the genius programmer that had engineered the original game entirely on his own acted as the brain behind the development, constructing the high-level architecture and directing the work. With such impressive features planned for the new game, development was not without its troubles. The AI system alone required tremendous effort to put into practice. Nakamura estimates that they completely overhauled the system as many as 12 times during development. and while the overall concepts remained the same throughout the process, many of the finer details would change along the way. Coded by Manabu Yamana, one of the game's 2 chief programmers, the AI system took an entire year to complete, and for the longest time, they couldn't be sure if it would actually pan out. As a failsafe, they even discussed adding a manual control mode just in case the AI system was a dud. In the end, their efforts paid off. Dragon Quest IV was easily the most advanced, most content-rich game the team had put out at this point. It had 3 times as much dialogue as before, a significantly greater variety of unique tiles to use in painting its environments, and a greatly expanded assortment of character sprites to populate the new world. But in spite of all these improvements, the fundamental gameplay remained very much unchanged. To be clear, this retrospective review is about the original version of Dragon Quest IV for the Nintendo Famicom, later released in North America for the Nintendo Entertainment System as Dragon Warrior IV. Later remakes introduced many changes that impact the overall experience, so if you've played another version of this game, some of the stuff I cover in this video might sound a bit off. Also, I'll be using the names of characters, spells, and locations from the original North American localization, many of which are different from the ones in the Japanese original, as well as later English translations. For all its ambitious features, Dragon Quest IV plays basically the same as the previous games. You navigate a vast overworld, searching for towns, dungeons, and other points of interest that hold clues and key items you need for your quest. You control a party of up to 4 characters, outfitting them with weapons, armor, and consumable items to help you survive. Enemies are fought in random encounters, and battles are turn-based using a phased system, where you select the actions of each character during a preparation phase before seeing it all play out in the execution phase. The series' trademark menu-based control scheme, which had been such an elegant solution for translating the complexity of a computer RPG onto a console in the original game, now feels dated and clunky compared to the context-sensitive controls of games like Final Fantasy. Still, Dragon Quest IV made a bunch of small but impactful improvements to the system, like showing a character's available spells before you select the spellcaster, providing a better overview of a character's equipped items, and letting you check what everyone's carrying while buying items from a shop. Also, the letter E now appears next to the names of characters who can equip a certain weapon or piece of armor before you buy it, saving a lot of time and effort while shopping. Another change that makes things smoother is the reintroduction of a menu option that's been missing since the first game. In Dragon Quest II and III, keys were used as items from the inventory, forcing you to rummage around the party's bags every time you wanted to open a door. In Dragon Quest IV, keys are used through the door command, so all you need to do is make sure you have them. But the biggest improvement is probably the way you save your game. Before, recording the player's progress was the sole domain of the world's monarchs, limiting the number of places where you could save your game to a handful of castles plus the occasional exception. Dragon Quest IV's kings and queens have better things to do than to keep track of what you're doing. Instead, for the first time in the series, you now record your progress at the local church, setting a standard that remains in place even to this day. This new approach might not seem like such a big deal, but it's actually a huge relief. It was all fine and dandy to go see the king in the original Dragon Quest, but starting from the third game, castles tend to be the most expansive environments you can find, and walking all the way from the entrance to town to the king's throne room can take quite a while. The church, on the other hand, can be placed near the entrance to town and doesn't require the presence of a castle. Even better, Dragon Quest IV's priests are not as talkative as the kings used to be. In the previous games, talking to a king or queen meant sitting through a long lecture on how much XP each character needs for their next level. Useful, to be sure, but only when you're actually interested. And you got this information whether you wanted to or not, even when you loaded your game. Instead, priests now offer an inform command that provides you with this information, but only when you ask for it. A huge boon, especially since you'll eventually have to account for 8 different characters. Imagine having to scroll through all that text every single time you load or save the game. But for all these minor improvements, By 1990, Dragon Quest IV's game engine was starting to show its age. The lack of context-sensitive controls means there's a ton of extra button presses involved in doing even the simplest things. Combat still plays out against a featureless black screen, and text-based feedback makes battles run super slow. Screen scrolling is kind of choppy, and movement is still extremely clunky, making precise navigation a bit of a pain. And the Famicom's issue with flicker, which Horii went to such great lengths to limit in Dragon Quest II, is now epidemic, to the point where you can't even move on the overworld without seeing it constantly. The visuals are not entirely without charm though. Akira Toriyama's monster designs are still top tier, and areas like the arena in Endor and the theater at Mon Baraba with their huge crowds really get a lot of mileage out of the limited means. And as we'll see later, the greater variety of tiles and sprites make environments feel more alive than ever before. But the overall visuals still pale in comparison to contemporary rivals, even the ones for the same system. Of course, no one ever really played Dragon Quest for the graphics, and I can live with all of these issues. The biggest frustration I had with the game's engine is actually something that's been a running theme ever since the original Dragon Quest. And because of certain design choices, it got even worse with Dragon Quest IV. Dragon Quest IV is the first game in the series where the search command is actually useful. Don't get me wrong, there was always one or two key items you had to search for in order to find, and the second and third games sprinkled a handful of hidden treasure throughout their worlds. But it wasn't nearly enough to justify scouring the environment. After checking a few likely locations for hidden treasure without getting rewarded for our efforts, players like me would simply stop looking. Dragon Quest IV does several things to fix this. Signposts in towns and on the overworld provide information through the search command. Pots, dressers, and other furniture give a strong indication that there might be something useful to find, making you more likely to look. But there's also just more stuff to find, even in places that aren't marked. Seeds and nuts that raise your character's attributes were first introduced in Dragon Quest III, but they're even more common here. And there's plenty of extra healing items hidden away as well. But the biggest reason you'd want to pay close attention to your environment is the introduction of a new kind of collectible that's primarily found using the search command. Small metals, known as mini-metals in later translations, made their first appearance in Dragon Quest IV. This rare currency can be traded to the Metal King, an eccentric NPC on a remote island, for unique and amazing rewards. Most importantly, there's only a limited number of small metals to find, 32 in total, and unless you're following a guide, you probably won't find them all in a single playthrough. So you'll have to choose what items to trade for very carefully. Small metals make exploration more interesting. Since there's so few of them, finding each one feels super satisfying. And given how rare they are, you might actually decide to risk a few extra random encounters to explore that suspicious looking nook in the dungeon, just in case there's a small metal hiding in that spot. That said, most of the time, you're still not going to find anything when you search. And honestly, that's a blessing in disguise. Because even though there's way more stuff to find in this game, the heroes still can't carry very much. Just like in the previous games, Dragon Quest IV's heroes can only hold 8 items each. There's no shared inventory, healing items don't stack, and the few slots you get have to fit your key items, spare weapons and armor, and even the character's current equipment. So anytime you get a new item, you usually have to throw something away just to make space for it. It's not that I don't think inventory management has a place in video games. I actually enjoy having to sort through bags, sell off junk, and consolidate my stuff. But as with everything else in life, it's fun in moderation. And Dragon Quest IV takes it much too far. I'm not kidding when I say that this issue is so bad, I didn't even like getting treasure in this game. Every time I opened a chest, I was half hoping it wouldn't hold something useful. And I often found myself hesitating to search pots and dressers, knowing I might not be able to carry the stuff I got. On paper, it doesn't seem like it should be such a big deal. With 8 companions eventually joining your party, you've got twice as many inventory slots to work with as in the previous game. But unless you're willing to turn some of the sideline characters into pack mules, the reality is that they all need their own set of gear and maybe an extra situational item or two. So adding another hero doesn't actually give you that much more space to work with. Of course, there's always the vault, which lets you store items you don't need to carry with you. It's a place to bin extra equipment you're unwilling to toss, key items you're pretty sure you won't need to use again, and small medals you haven't had a chance to hand over yet. But making constant trips to the vault just to stay afloat can be kind of a chore, and each visit only gives temporary relief. The longer the game goes, the more of an issue it becomes, until it's almost unbearable towards the end. I often found myself wishing the game would have made the vault accessible on the overworld. A portable storage, if you like, one the heroes could bring with them. It's not even that crazy of an idea. After all, if you're looking for a place to put that stuff, Dragon Quest IV already has the perfect solution. In addition to the player avatar, the hero, Dragon Quest IV features 7 fully playable characters, as well as another 8 guest characters who come and go throughout the story. To accommodate such a large cast, the game would have to make some fundamental changes to the way Dragon Quest handled the player party. While combat would remain limited to 4 characters at a time, the rest of the crew still had to be accounted for. Ever since Dragon Quest II, Horii had been adamant that the entire party should be shown on screen while you're traveling across the overworld or exploring a town or dungeon. But displaying 8 or more characters at the same time would start to look a lot like a game of Snake. Dragon Quest IV's solution to this problem is the Caravan, a horse-drawn wagon in the style of the Old West, with enough room to fit an entire roster of extra characters. On a conceptual level, the Caravan serves the same role as Louisa's Place from Dragon Quest III, a place where adventurers who are currently between jobs can spend their downtime, hoping to hire their services out to prospective heroes. But in terms of gameplay, the Caravan has 2 major advantages over Dragon Quest III's Tavern. First of all, Louisa's Place was a fixed location, so if you wanted to swap out your team members, you had to put your quest on hold and travel back to Aliahan. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, characters chilling at Louisa's Place weren't earning any experience. These early Dragon Quest games don't use any form of XP scaling, so catching up to higher level characters can be a long road, which meant that switching party members in Dragon Quest III was a huge commitment, not something you did in the spur of the moment. Dragon Quest IV's Caravan changed all of this. At any point in your travels, you can go into the tactics menu and change your formation, sending some characters to rest in the wagon while others jump out to join the party. Better yet, characters in the Caravan are still part of your extended party. You can access their inventories, mess around with their gear, and cast their spells. And yes, thankfully, they also gain experience points at the same rate as the ones that participate in combat, so you don't have to worry so much about anyone falling behind. In fact, you can even change your party formation in the middle of battle. Once per turn, you can swap out a character in your party for someone in the Caravan, letting you replace a fallen ally, hide a vulnerable party member, or bring out that special someone who just happens to have the right tool to deal with a certain threat. The Caravan even functions as a safeguard against bad luck. If the party should all fall in battle, as long as there are healthy allies left in the Caravan, they'll jump right in to continue the fight. The Caravan is a really cool idea with some great features. But in terms of execution, it also comes with some serious flaws. It's kind of frustrating that you cannot reform your party in towns and castles, and as I hinted at earlier, I think it's a missed opportunity not to put the vault in the wagon. But the biggest issue is just how little of an effect the Caravan really has on the game's battles. Horii and Nakamura had envisioned character swapping to play a big role in Dragon Quest IV's combat. In practice, it's not so much of a core mechanic as it is a gimmick. Out of the game's 22 dungeons, only 3 allow full access to the Caravan, and one of them is irrelevant by the time you have it. Another 3 dungeons allow partial access, meaning you can bring up the extended party's inventories and have them cast spells, but you cannot change your formation either in or out of combat. The result is that there are really only 2 dungeons, the cave west of Kiev on your second visit and the cave to the Dark World, that fully integrate the Caravan into the dungeon crawling experience. And as awesome as rolling through the cave of the Dark World with your full party is, there's just not enough of this kind of content to justify the feature. Most of the game's significant action takes place in situations where the Caravan isn't available, and encounters on the overworld simply don't deliver the kind of moment-to-moment decision-making the co-creators were hoping for. Especially when you take into account that Dragon Quest IV's big innovation, the literal game-changing mechanic that was its major selling point back in 1990, essentially teaches you not to get too involved in combat. One of the key characteristics of early Dragon Quest is the strong emphasis the game places on monster identity. Different enemies demand wildly different strategies, and the key to coming out ahead in the game's combat is to learn how to deal with each monster. The lethal Gopher builds up power for a single butt-whooping strike. The Oswarg hammers you with powerful magic but quickly drains its MP. And the Demon Toadstool's attacks don't do a lot of straight-up damage, but there's a good chance they'll poison the target. Some enemies are strong against physical attacks but weak against magic. Others can be dispatched with ease when you apply the right debuff, and there are monsters that ignore the party formation, focusing fire on a single vulnerable character. Luck plays a role, but at its core, combat is all about risk management. Not all monsters are created equal, and the order in which you take them down will often decide the outcome of any given battle. Every enemy formation is its own little puzzle to solve, and the better you grasp the strengths and weaknesses of each monster, the better you'll do in combat. It's a setup that rewards player skill and discourages mindless spamming of the same basic options. Or it would be, if the game would actually let you make these choices yourself. In the first 4 chapters, battles play out more or less the same as in the previous games. You control one or more characters, choosing their actions ahead of time during each round of combat. But these early chapters also introduce guest characters, like Healy, the friendly heel slime. Guest characters will follow you and fight beside you, but they aren't part of the core group. You cannot access their inventory or change their equipment, and most importantly, they won't take orders from you in battle. Guest characters play an important role in these early chapters, helping to round out the smaller party sizes, but they're really there to prepare you for what's to come. Because when you reach the final chapter and get into the meat of Dragon Quest IV, only the hero is yours to control in combat. The rest of the party members are controlled by the game's artificial intelligence. To pick a character's action in combat, Dragon Quest IV uses a pretty complicated algorithm. A wealth of different factors are taken into account, including the current hit points and status of each participant, as well as the amount of damage they'll be able to do with different moves. It also looks at known resistances and immunities, active buffs and debuffs, and what actions have already been taken this turn. Based on all this information and more, the AI chooses what the character should do: attack with a weapon or spell, heal an ally, cast a buff, or any number of other options available to them. You do have some control over your allies though. The tactics menu lets you tweak their general behavior before each round of combat. You can choose offensive to burn down powerful enemies as fast as possible, switch to use no MP to conserve resources against trivial foes, or go with defensive if things are getting out of hand. If you're feeling extra lucky, there's even a tactic called Try Out, which essentially randomizes the character's actions. Your AI-controlled allies are remarkably smart, especially when it comes to killing monsters. They know when to attack, when to cast spells, and when to target groups of enemies instead of a single monster. And true to Horii's vision of a companion that learns over time, they actually get better at killing specific monsters the more they fight them. When you first encounter a given monster in battle, your AI-controlled allies don't know that much about it. They don't have a clear view of what spells or attacks will be effective against it, so they'll just have to give it their best shot. But the more you fight that particular monster, the better acquainted with it your party becomes. With each round of combat, there's a chance the AI's understanding of the monster will increase. Monster knowledge starts at rank 0 and maxes out at 3, at which point your allies will avoid casting spells that won't work, always pick the most effective option, and generally make the monster's life a living hell. In its best moments, the AI system makes for some pretty intense fights, where the tension of combat is heightened by the fact that you only have limited control of the outcome. Using the tactics menu to direct combat feels a bit like a prehistoric version of Final Fantasy XIII's paradigm shifts, and it can lead to some really exciting moments. But in the grand scheme of things, I honestly feel like it doesn't pay off. As impressive as the feature was for its time, it just doesn't feel like a good fit for Dragon Quest. A large part of the reason why Dragon Quest IV's AI does so well is because your computer-controlled allies break a lot of the fundamental rules of combat. They know exactly how many hit points each enemy has left, and how much damage their own attacks will do. More importantly, your allies don't have to decide on their actions ahead of time. They get to disregard Dragon Quest's phased combat system and pick their move when their turn comes up, which leads to ridiculous situations like Nara, a spellcaster, casually attacking with a dagger for 17 damage to finish off one of the game's most powerful bosses. The AI never miscalculates, never wastes an attack trying to hit something that's no longer there, and generally coordinates its offense extremely effectively, meaning that enemies fall faster and with less resources spent. Learning to deal with different monsters was a huge part of what made the previous game's combat so much fun. That fundamental process is still there in the fourth game, but now it's the AI that learns, not you. Having the AI fight for you is extremely convenient, and watching your party blast through encounter after encounter as you explore the overworld or grind for experience can be pretty satisfying. But when you're no longer calling the shots in combat, there's not much left for the player to do. The great irony is that when you finally get into a situation where the AI struggles, your options to do something about it are severely limited. Dragon Quest IV has significantly more boss encounters than any of the previous games, but the AI system isn't really built to handle such epic confrontations. Since each boss monster is unique, your party starts out knowing nothing about their strengths and weaknesses, so they'll do lots of dumb stuff in those early rounds, like casting instant death spells over and over, even though they obviously won't work. They'll eventually figure it out, but there's a good chance the battle is over before they do. This issue is especially bad against the final boss. The battle with Necrosaro is split into 7 different phases, and each one effectively counts as a different monster. Granted, the AI still learns from a fight even if you die, so if you're happy to beat your head against the boss over and over, you should do better and better with each try. But it's not exactly a fun way to design the game's climactic battle. As good as the AI is at what it does, getting it to do what you want is extremely hard. Allies tend to wait until a character is nearly dead before bothering to heal them. Buffs and debuffs, which were such a huge deal in Dragon Quest III, are almost never used, and items with unique powers like Nara's silver tarot cards can only ever be used if you set your party's actions to random. Speedrunners have made a whole science out of voodooing the AI-controlled characters into doing what they want by micromanaging different factors like equipment and tactics, but a filthy casual like me can go the whole game without ever seeing Bray cast Bykill, a buff that literally doubles a character's physical damage. Dragon Quest IV's artificial intelligence was an incredibly ambitious feature for an 8-bit console game, and as a tech demo, the Dragon Quest series was the perfect proving grounds for this type of innovative system. Most JRPGs can be beaten by spamming your most powerful attacks and throwing in a bit of healing here and there. Dragon Quest IV's emphasis on monster knowledge and clever decision making made the AI system look really good. And as a kid in the early 90s, seeing Nara and Mara wipe out enemies with expertly slung spells must have felt a lot like magic. But as great a fit as Dragon Quest was for artificial intelligence, including this feature wasn't a great fit for Dragon Quest. In Dragon Quest III, the 4 characters of my party felt like an extension of myself. I knew them intimately, their strengths and limitations, what spells they could cast, and the MP cost of each one. And for sure I knew how to deal with different monsters. Hard-won knowledge claimed over hundreds of battles. All those agonizing decisions about which monster to target first, whether you need to heal right now or if it can wait until next round, whether a certain enemy formation warranted the use of a well-placed buff, whether to hit a monster with your most powerful spell or save your MP for later, these nail-biting dilemmas were what kept me engaged through countless random encounters. And all of that is just gone in Dragon Quest IV. I never got to know my character's exact capabilities, never had a solid sense of who has what spell, and I certainly never bothered to memorize what worked against which monster. Because even if I had, what's the point? The AI handled all of that for me. Sure, I'm in control of the one character, but I spent most of my time serving as a glorified heal bot. To put it bluntly, I was watching the computer play the best part of the game. Of course, that's not to say that you have no influence over the outcome of battles. There's still one aspect of gameplay where the player exercises absolute control. When it comes to the sheer freedom it offers, Dragon Quest IV can seem like a big downgrade from the previous game. After all, Dragon Quest III's vocation system essentially gave the player carte blanche to form whatever party they wanted from a wealth of available options. And yes, Dragon Quest IV imposes a lot more restrictions on party formation, but there's still some interesting choices to be made. Just like in Dragon Quest II, your party grows throughout the story, as each new ally joins the quest. Only this time, recruitment doesn't stop at 3. Each of the hero's 7 companions brings something different to the table. Ragnar is a warrior, Alina is a fighter, and Taloon is a merchant. Christo and Nara are more or less pilgrims, and Bray and Mara are pretty much wizards, though each of the 4 spellcasters put their own spin on their respective vocation. While you're no longer able to create your own characters or make crazy specialist formations like a team of 3 goof-offs, the game still offers more than enough variety to satisfy most players. With 8 characters to choose from and 4 slots to fill, there's 70 possible parties you could put on the field. And that's not including guest characters. In practice, almost any playstyle you could think of can be accommodated. A team with Christo and Nara lets you cast healing magic as if there's no tomorrow. Put Nara, Mara and Bray together and you can blow through enemy formations with endless spells. Or you could bring Ragnar, Alina and Taloon for maximum physical damage. And yeah, I'm gonna say Ragnar's name the Swedish way. It's a Swedish name. Extreme examples aside, you also have quite a bit of choice in tweaking your perfect team. Among frontline fighters, Ragnar is strong but slow. Alina deals crushing damage with critical hits, and Taloon's a wild card with a collection of unpredictable antics, like convincing the monsters to leave the battle or making an enemy laugh so hard they lose their turn. Spell selection is also a big deal when it comes to magic users. Nara, Mara and Bray all have different sets of attack spells. And even basic stuff like Antidote, X-Ray and Step Guard is restricted to a single character. The opportunity to manage a roster of 8 characters, more including guest characters, that could be rearranged into a party of 4 at any point in the quest was groundbreaking for its time. And picking your party from a list of potential options is, as always, a lot of fun. I love how distinct each character feels in terms of strengths and abilities, and it's fun to see them grow into their respective role throughout the story. But freedom of choice also means the freedom to go with your own heart, and I mostly picked my team based on personal preference. Some characters are definitely stronger, but all of them are very much viable, at least until you get to the very end. Dragon Quest IV's final battle is one of the few bosses that's built around the use of the Caravan, but it certainly wasn't designed to encourage experimentation. The climactic encounter follows a now familiar formula that's been a recurring theme with the early Dragon Quest games. Necrosaro is immune to most magic and has bounce up at most times anyway, so anything you cast on him is likely to turn right back at your own party. Buffing yourself is a waste of time, since the Freezing Waves attack nullifies all active spells, and he uses it every other turn. And the villain's attacks do so much damage that only the sturdiest characters can even go more than a round without emergency healing. Not to mention that he secretly regenerates about 100 hit points each round, making the battle a bit of a DPS check. His only weakness is a quirk in the code that allows the Sword of Lethargy, a mid-game weapon, to put anything it hits to sleep, including the final boss. So unless you're willing to exploit an obvious bug to get your win, you're gonna have to pick the team that's best suited to finish the job. I tried a number of different character combinations across multiple attempts, but the only one that worked for me was the most boring one. Hero, Ragnar, Alina, and Christo. With all other avenues close to me, going all out on physical damage and mass healing was the only strategy that seemed to make sense. And that's a really unfortunate way to cap off a game that should be all about making the most of the whole Caravan. Granted, with the notable exception of the final battle, the Caravan system is a lot of fun. And while your options against certain bosses are severely limited, you're spoiled for choice in how to tackle the hostile environments you have to traverse in order to reach them. When it comes to the general gameplay, fans are pretty much split down the middle about which of Dragon Quest III and Dragon Quest IV is the ultimate form of Dragon Quest for the Famicom. But there's one area in which, at least to my mind, the sequel has the clear advantage. Because Dragon Quest IV's dungeons are better than ever. It's not that there's some great revolution in how the game structures its dungeon crawls, and it's not about the fact that Dragon Quest IV has more dungeons than ever before, 22 of them by my count, though it's a matter of definition. It's more about the game's approach to dungeon design. Dragon Quest IV took another major step away from the senseless labyrinths of the early titles and towards something that more closely resembles the kind of unique, self-contained adventures that would become a touchstone of dungeon design in Japanese RPGs. And Dragon Quest IV was most certainly a frontrunner in this field. Dungeon environments are more logically constructed and feature a lot more landmarks to navigate by. Elevation differences add visual complexity to what would otherwise be a warren of featureless rooms and corridors, a technique that's used to great effect in the Cave of the Silver Statuette, where pushing a button floods the lower level with water, allowing the party to access previously out-of-reach areas using a ship. Elevator rooms add some extra texture to vertical exploration, which pays off especially well in Necrosaro's palace, where you need to ride elevators between floors to free up the lift shaft so you can loop back around and pass through the vacated space. There's also a lot more puzzles to solve. Dungeons like the Cave of the Padaquaya feature chains of forced movement tiles that must be navigated to find the path or access optional treasure, a solid improvement over Dragon Quest III's scrambled movement tiles. There are clay golems that must be outmaneuvered to avoid costly battles, rolling boulders to dodge, and pushable rocks to move onto pressure plates to avoid getting trapped. It's all pretty straightforward stuff, but these simple problem-solving tasks work wonders with pacing, providing a welcome break from fighting monsters. Many of the game's dungeons have a distinct look and feel. The interior of a walking statue, a tower that connects the earth with the clouds, and a passage across the branches of the gargantuan world tree are just some of the highlights in this game's arsenal of amazing dungeons. And the greatly expanded tileset works wonders in bringing life to these evocative concepts. In the Actemto mines, wooden braces prop up the rough stone walls, rickety ladders replace stairs, and loose rock litters the carved tunnels. Cascade Cave has you navigating past towering piles of falling water, giving the dungeon a three-dimensional feel. And Estark's palace sits in an enormous cavern surrounded by the jagged teeth of tapering columns of rock formations. Dragon Quest IV also helped break down the barriers between dungeon crawl and story. the Lock Tower, with its opening cutscene and story-rich finale, feels like a prototype for the Tower of Zot from Final Fantasy IV, which came out a year later. The Cave of Betrayal dispenses with random encounters and ordinary pathfinding entirely, opting instead for telling a story. And at the top of the Zenithian Tower, you find an entire castle to explore. But the best example of this intersection between plot and gameplay isn't even a dungeon. At least, not in the traditional sense. It's not often I pick up a Famicom game for the first time in this day and age, and I'm genuinely blown away. But Dragon Quest IV had a couple of sequences that really impressed me, and the best of these was the martial arts tournament that caps off Elena's adventure. From the moment you first set foot in Endor's Colosseum, the tournament sequence is brilliantly executed using the game's limited assets. The swelling crowds in the stands and the fighters that dart back and forth on the sands of the arena breathe life into the setting. There's an entire building dedicated to this mini-adventure, complete with all the amenities you'd need to prepare for your challenge, as well as a chance to trade words with one of your rivals. Proceeding to the arena floor, you're faced with a gauntlet of exciting opponents, most of them with custom sprites for this occasion alone. And there's even a great twist right at the end to cap it all off. The tournament sequence is probably the most elaborate set-piece scenario I've seen in an 8-bit RPG. And yeah, it's not a dungeon per se, but that's kind of the point. This is the kind of blurring of lines between gameplay and story that would eventually give us iconic experiences like Final Fantasy VI's opera sequence or the trial from Chrono Trigger. And Dragon Quest IV was doing it before pretty much everyone else. But even though Dragon Quest IV's scenario writing and level design were years ahead of its time, the fundamental gameplay is still stuck in the same old school philosophy from which the series first sprung. Which means it's still mostly about surviving random encounters. But even here, change was coming. Despite all its innovative features and newfangled ideas, the basic unit of gameplay around which Dragon Quest IV is built is still the random encounter, and it's definitely the part of the game that has aged the most poorly. Random encounters are as frequent as ever, and there's still no cooldown on how often they can occur, so it's rare to spend more than 5 to 10 seconds actually exploring a dungeon before having to fight. The result is that dungeon crawling feels choppy, and it's easy to lose track of where you were going. Puzzle solving can feel like a chore when every wasted step is another potential random encounter. And since the background music gets interrupted whenever you get into a fight, you'll end up listening to the same few introductory notes of the dungeon theme over and over. As a tension-building mechanic, random encounters do have their place. They encourage careful management of limited resources, make even the most trivial navigational decisions meaningful. And since not all random encounters are created equal, it actually makes sense to include a fight or flight mechanic. But they're easily the most frustrating part of these old-school console RPGs. But even though you still have to deal with a ton of random encounters, Dragon Quest IV is significantly more lenient than the previous games. The AI is mercilessly good at murdering monsters, dungeons are generally on the shorter side, and items that replenish a character's magic points are much easier to come by. Not to mention that if you do have access to the Caravan, even the most one-sided random encounter cannot end your adventure, since the backup characters will jump in to save the day if the main party gets wiped out. But these are all minor factors compared to the most significant difference. Because in Dragon Quest IV, for the first time in the series, you don't have to grind a bunch of random encounters in order to get strong enough to complete the game. Part of the answer lies in the fact that Dragon Quest IV has the best gear progression the series had seen so far. In the previous games, regular upgrades to weapons and armor were only available up to a certain point in the quest, with the back half of the game offering very few chances to spend your gold. In Dragon Quest IV, there's plenty of new stuff to find all the way into the endgame, and new shopping opportunities like the stores in Rosaville and Elfville or the secret armor in Endor keep gold relevant for far longer. But as much of an effect as better gear progression has, the literal game changer is in how Dragon Quest IV awards levels. earning experience in the previous games could be a rough process, and there were numerous points in the quest where you more or less had to stop to grind for levels to get strong enough to continue. But in Dragon Quest IV, you barely have to fight any extra battles at all. Just by exploring the world, clearing dungeons, and defeating bosses, you'll usually get strong enough to handle what's thrown at you. Even though there's still no XP scaling, higher level enemies now give so much more experience that it's actually worth fighting them this time around. Boss monsters also yield huge boosts to XP, often enough for everyone to level up at least once, and you end up fighting a lot more of them in this game. And there's even a few points in the story where the characters are rewarded with bonus experience for clearing a quest, something never before seen in this series. And if you still find yourself wanting to grind from time to time, you now have more options for fast XP than ever. Farming metal slimes and metal babbles is more reliable, and Dragon Quest IV introduced the King Metal, an elusive critter which gives an incredible 30,000 XP if you're able to take it down. There were only 2 times in the whole game where I actually felt the need to get stronger, and they happened at opposite ends of the quest. The first was in the Lock Tower in Ragnar's chapter, but that's only because I went there before I had fully explored my surroundings. The second was in the final battle, and I'm pretty sure I would have won that too if I'd just been allowed to control the whole party. Dragon Quest IV is still very much an old school experience, but the fact that you don't have to stop to grind levels every time you hit a new region of the world makes it feel a lot more modern. And this change couldn't have come at a better time, because in Dragon Quest IV, you're going to have to start from level 1 5 times. One of the cornerstones of Dragon Quest IV's design was the idea of a narrative divided into separate episodes, each telling the story of a different character. The result was a tale told across 5 chapters: Ragnar, a loyal castle knight; Alina, a rebellious princess; Taloon, an enterprising merchant; Nara and Mara, 2 sisters seeking vengeance for their father; and finally the hero, your character, a young warrior at the center of a prophecy. In some ways, the 5-chapter structure was the perfect fit for the 4th game, and it actually solved a problem that had been building up across the Erdrick trilogy. Although the original Dragon Quest had been designed as a simple introduction to RPGs, each new title added more and more complexity. And by the time Dragon Quest III came out, the series was far less suitable for genre newbies. With more features to learn and content to experience than ever before, there was a concern that Dragon Quest IV could get overwhelming to some players. Using the 5-chapter structure as a tool, Yuji Horii designed the first 2 chapters as callbacks to the first 2 games. Chapter 1 is a lot like Dragon Quest, placing you in control of a single hero with a limited environment to explore. To give the player their first taste of computer-controlled allies, Horii also included Healy, a monster that would accompany Ragnar on his mission and provide some much-needed healing. Similarly, the 2nd chapter followed the structure of Dragon Quest II, putting you in charge of a party of 3 highly specialized characters, and unlike Ragnar's quest, Alina's journey lets her range a lot further, taking you through a number of towns, castles, and dungeons for an experience a lot more like a full-scale Dragon Quest game. But the 5-chapter structure wasn't just a convenient way to bring new and returning players up to speed. It was a fundamental departure from the familiar formula. In many ways, Dragon Quest IV is essentially 5 games in one, organized as a sort of interconnected anthology. Each protagonist starts at level 1 and rises in strength throughout their own quest, but the progress you make carries over into the final chapter. Levels earned and equipment bought will still be there, and forward-thinking players can even go out of their way to secure certain weapons, armor, and items to ensure early access to them in the final chapter. Really, the only thing that isn't carried over is gold, and there are ways to deal with that too. Starting over from scratch 5 times might seem like it would get tedious, but it's actually the opposite. 5 chapters means 5 different perspectives, and each one is a very different experience. There are different characters to control, different parts of the world to explore, and different objectives to seek out. But the chapter structure also allows the game to get some extra mileage out of its limited assets. Some dungeons are revisited in Chapter 5 in a different context, and the lessons you learn in combat can be applied against the same monsters in later chapters, just with another set of characters. But among all of the game's features, there is one that has a stronger synergy with the chapter structure than anything else. Dragon Quest III introduced the Monster Arena, a place in town where you could gamble on the outcome of battles between different monsters. This was a great innovation and a fun diversion, but it had very little impact on the actual gameplay. The same cannot be said for Dragon Quest IV's Casino. The casino offers a wider range of services. In addition to the return of the Monster Arena, there's also poker and slot machines. But the main thing that sets the casino apart is that it's not just a place to earn a bit of extra gold. In fact, you cannot even win gold from the casino. Instead, you play for casino coins, and if you earn enough of them, they can be traded in for some pretty amazing rewards. Spend enough time at the casino and you can kit your spellcasters out with metal babble shields to make them as sturdy as tanks. Fill your inventory with wizard rings for infinite MP and get speed-enhancing meteorite armbands for your whole party. The casino isn't for everyone, and it's far from mandatory. But if you do put in the time, it can make the rest of the game significantly easier. And it plays especially well into Dragon Quest IV's chapter structure. You'll probably have most of your dealings with the casino in Chapter 5, but it can be accessed as early as Chapter 2. And while gold doesn't carry over between chapters, casino coins do. So you can convert your excess gold into coins before finishing a chapter, and accumulating enough winnings in the early game lets you pass on some really cool items to the hero in the final chapter. In dividing the adventure into 5 chapters, Horii and his team knew they were making a trade-off. For all the benefits of this approach, there would also be some downsides. And the most significant one is probably the way it affected the exploration gameplay. The original Dragon Quest is one of the most open-ended adventures you'll find on an 8-bit console. While there were a handful of steps you had to take before you could reach the Dragon Lord's castle, you could pursue those objectives in any order, and the vast majority of the gameplay was structured around free-form exploration as you searched for key items. Dragon Quest II and III added more and more mandatory steps, but the critical path remained relatively open, especially in the back half of the game. Dragon Quest IV retains the same general approach, but your path through the game is more linear than ever. Some of the fault lies with the chapter structure. Not only do the 5 chapters play out in a strict sequential order, but each one is, due to its narrow scope, understandably linear. With limited space and content to devote to each chapter, these early sequences just couldn't include a lot of branching paths. But even the final chapter, the grand adventure that forms the heart of the story, offers less freedom than ever before. At least when you look at the critical path. You must reach Endor and recruit Nara before you can join up with Mara. You need both sisters before you can tackle the Cave of Betrayal, which gives you the symbol of faith you need to convince Hector to hand you the reins to the Caravan. The Caravan lets you cross the desert to reach the Great Lighthouse, where a bit of monster bashing rewards you with the sailing ship. And on it goes. The previous games also followed linear paths of progression, but once you got the sailing ship, you were given a lot of latitude in how to continue your quest. Dragon Quest II let you seek out the 5 crests in almost any order, and Dragon Quest III made the hunt for the 6 orbs a mostly open-ended process. Dragon Quest IV uses a similar structural element in the 4 Zenithian relics, but the way they're placed on the critical path gives you much less leeway in how to approach them. All 4 relics, sword, armor, helm, and shield, must be grabbed before you can climb the Zenithian Tower. And in theory, you could go after them in any order, but in practice, you probably won't. Only the helm can be claimed as soon as you have the ship. The armor requires the magic key, the shield cannot be yours without the magma staff, and the sword will have to wait until you have the hot air balloon very close to the end of the game. There's also less optional locations to explore this time around. Fully 1/3 of Dragon Quest III's 18 dungeons were free to skip, but that number has shrunk to a mere 3 out of 22 in Dragon Quest IV. and 2 of those dungeons are from Chapter 3. And it's worth pointing out that the previous game had a couple of points on the critical path that could actually be skipped if you did enough grinding. The Open spell made keys redundant, and the Invis spell let you enter Edginbear Castle without the use of the invisibility herb. It's probably no coincidence that Dragon Quest IV did away with both of these spells. But here's the thing. Even though Dragon Quest IV is undeniably the most linear of the series' 4 entries for the Famicom, it doesn't actually feel that way, especially not on a first playthrough. Open world game design isn't just about the critical path, it's also about the illusion of freedom, and Dragon Quest IV does this extremely well. To explain what I mean, consider the position you find yourself in when you first get the ship. You could travel to the northern reaches of the Soretta continent and trace the foothills of a mysterious mountain range, wondering what secrets the desert on the other side hides. You could sail upriver on the mysterious southern continent, find a hidden village built on its shores, and cast longing glances at the Shrine of Colossus. You could head to Rosaville to buy some awesome equipment. You could take a trip to the Isle of the Small Metal King and start trading in your collectibles. Or you could sail for the Shrine of Breaking Waves and maybe try your luck against the powerful monsters that dwell on the threshold, even though you can't unlock the doors. And that's just a small sample of the things you could do when you first get the ship. With so many options on the table, who cares that there are only 2 locations on the map that will actually advance the story? Dragon Quest IV is linear, but not in the sense we think of today. You're not ushered from one story sequence to the next, and you don't get a bunch of cutscenes that lay out the next steps on the quest and where to go. It's up to you to actually explore, talk to NPCs, and find your own way forward. There were definitely times in the game where I was stumped for what to do next, but I never felt like I wanted for options. In fact, I was usually spoiled for choice. Of course, it's not just about how much freedom you have or the amount of stuff there is to find. It's also about the quality of the content. And on that front, Dragon Quest IV has got you covered, because the game's world is more vibrant than ever before. The first 3 Dragon Quest games had taken place in increasingly large worlds, with the greatest leap in size being made between the first and second title. But with Dragon Quest IV, that specific era of expansion came to an end. The 4th game's world is no larger than the one in Dragon Quest III. It's actually a bit smaller when you account for Dragon Quest III's World of Darkness. And in terms of absolute numbers, Dragon Quest IV even has fewer locations to find on the overworld than in the previous game. This was a deliberate choice. As the 1980s drew to a close, the team felt that the era when RPGs had competed over who had the biggest map was over. Instead, with Dragon Quest IV, they wanted to dazzle the players with the quality of the content. While Dragon Quest III does have the edge in the number of locations, a lot of them were shrines that housed the game's extensive network of travel doors or provided optional instructions. When it comes to the meat of the content, Dragon Quest IV has more dungeons and substantially more towns and castles. Not to mention that the locations themselves are a lot more interesting. Just as in the game's dungeons, the expanded tileset goes a long way to add character to towns and castles. There's no mistaking the wealthy merchant port of Conan Bear's sheltered piers and lavish fountain with the wooden cottages and horse-plowed fields of the sleepy farming village of Kieves. And neither place has much at all in common with Elfville, a community nestled among the exposed roots of the World Tree. Even the game's castles have their own distinct flair. The bustling metropolis of Endor feels entirely different from Soretta, whose courtiers sleep on the floor of a rough stone dwelling, while the king himself spends his days plowing the fields. And in isolated Stancia, the soaring columns of the king's mighty castle rise directly from the water, and shops and homes are connected by a network of canals instead of streets. The arena in Endor, the mighty ship that sits in the harbor in Havel, the travelers' inn of Mintos, and the stalls of the desert bazaar. Almost every town and castle has something unique about it, and a huge part of that comes from the NPCs that populate them. In the earlier games, non-player characters either stood around on the spot or wandered aimlessly. Dragon Quest IV gave a lot of them pre-programmed routes to walk, suggesting daily routines and tasks appropriate to their individual lives. Soldiers patrol the king's castle in set patterns. Overstimulated children test their teacher's patience in Izmit's schoolhouse, and dancers twirl about the stage in Monbaraba. And waiting in line for an audience with the King of Stancia is one of the most immersive experiences I've had in an RPG. Some NPCs are even programmed to react to your presence. The shopkeeper in Burland stands chatting with his wife, but dashes to the counter when customers appear. The prisoner in the basement of Endor Castle approaches the door to his cell when he hears you coming. And the priest in the village of Frenor is tending his garden when you arrive, but rushes into the church to administer to your needs. It might not seem like such a big deal, but these tiny little touches add a lot of character to otherwise unremarkable NPCs. The day-night cycle also adds a lot of depth to these explorations. Many locations go through dramatic transformations between day and night, and you often need to visit the town or castle at both times to get the full picture. In the seaside village, the evening tide that floods the beach is key to finding the Stone of Drought. The Prince of Bon Malmo arranges to meet you in the gardens at night, far away from prying eyes. And in Monbaraba, the dancing girl Lynn is hiding from the king's men, and she'll only tell you the story if you show up after dark. For its time, Dragon Quest IV's world was exceptionally well realized. Honestly, in spite of its simple presentation, this is one of the most vibrant settings I've ever explored in an RPG. The game was at least 4 or 5 years ahead of the curve with this stuff, and during this particular era of gaming, that's a huge head start. And sure, all of this added texture does come with a downside. Uncooperative NPCs getting in your way is a bigger problem than ever before, now that they have a mind of their own. It can be hard to catch up to NPCs because they're moving so fast, and that one innkeeper in Branca sometimes steps away from her counter for like 30 seconds at a time. But I can live with a few inconveniences here and there, when exploration is this much fun. There's a lot to see and do in this world, and by the time you're through, you feel like you've been on a massive adventure. And that tracks, because Dragon Quest IV is an epic tale. The first 3 Dragon Quest games eventually became known as the Erdrick trilogy, because they were set in the same world and told a more or less overarching story. This interconnected narrative wasn't planned from the start, but something that developed organically with each successive title. But at this point, Yuji Horii felt that the story of Erdrick was done and dusted. For Dragon Quest IV, it was time for a fresh start. The tale the 4th game tells is a familiar one. The dreaded ruler of evil, once banished from this world by the Master Dragon, will soon return. But legend tells of a chosen one, a child of prophecy destined to vanquish evil with the aid of a magical sword. It's a story we've heard 1,000 times, but don't let the simplistic concept fool you. Dragon Quest IV's narrative is much more ambitious than it first might seem. And it's not the tools used to tell the story that got better, it's the way they were used. The most significant change is the introduction of Dragon Quest's first real characters. The experience is still centered around a player avatar that serves as the main protagonist, a blank slate for you to imbue with your own thoughts and feelings, a trademark of the Dragon Quest series. But this time, the hero is only one of 8 companions, each with their own story to tell. Horii wanted to explore the individual lives of the hero's companions, and Dragon Quest IV does just that. Where the stories of the Erdrick trilogy were essentially all variations on the same formula of "go forth and destroy the darkness," Dragon Quest IV's companions all have strong personal motivations for participating in the quest. Ragnar is a soldier duty-bound to serve his king, drawn into the adventure when he's sent to rescue a group of missing children. Princess Elena is driven by a desire for personal growth and a need to see the world. Taloon is stuck in a dead-end job with a wife and kid and dreams of making it big as an entrepreneur. And Nara and Mara seek vengeance against the man who murdered their father. Even the hero, your character, is motivated by more than noble feelings. the game's main antagonist exterminates your entire village in an attempt to destroy you, giving you plenty of reason to take him on. These personal motivations give the story a much stronger driving force, but they also allow the game to immerse you more deeply into its world. When you wander around Burland as Ragnar, people treat you as one of them. The king of Santim is Alina's father, and the residents of the castle her subjects and advisors. Taloon can pop in on his family when he needs to rest, and when Nara and Mara visit Kieves, the innkeeper puts them up for free because they're Edgar's daughters. Even though the companions still don't have much to say, their motivations help bring them to life. The fact that Taloon is willing to brave the monster-infested wilderness to bring about his dream of being the world's greatest arms merchant says more about him than the longest character bio ever could. Seeing Ragnar go above and beyond the call of duty to search for the prophesied hero speaks to his noble nature. And we know how deeply Princess Alena cares about her skills as a fighter because she's willing to climb out of the window in the middle of the night to continue her training. The way the game brings the party together in the final chapter is also remarkably dynamic. While Nara and Mara join up without much prompting, the others need a little more convincing before they'll follow. Princess Alena won't come along unless you cure Christo's illness. Taloon demands that you clear the Great Lighthouse of monsters so his ship can set sail, and Ragnar only joins forces with you after you help him liberate Kilion Castle from its monstrous tyrant. The personal touch given to each companion adds a bit of variety to the recruitment process and makes each of these people feel more real. All of this means that Dragon Quest IV is the first game in the series that allows you to have a favorite character. Sure, there were always the occasional named NPC, and the prince and princess from the second game technically fit the definition of predefined characters, but they had no real substance, and even their names were randomized on each playthrough. Dragon Quest IV is still your story, but now you get to share it with a bunch of colorful companions with lives of their own. Of course, it wasn't just the game's characters that were more elaborate and engaging than before. The story itself was also far better crafted. I would argue that Dragon Quest IV is the first game in the series to tell a cohesive story. While Dragon Quest III greatly expanded the scope of the narrative and the quality of the individual scenarios, it was still more like a series of loosely connected adventures than the kind of overarching story we'd expect from a role-playing game today. The great irony is that even though Dragon Quest IV is literally structured as a series of episodes, the overall story feels much more coherent. This is the first game in the series where you start the adventure not knowing who the bad guy is. In fact, the identity of the villain and the true nature of his fiendish plot is presented as a bit of a mystery, a fairly novel approach for a video game from this era. Each of the 4 introductory chapters adds critical context to this overarching story, letting you piece it all together bit by bit. In Ragnar's chapter, the search for missing kids eventually reveals that the monsters are exterminating children in an attempt to prevent the Chosen One from fulfilling the prophecy. Princess Alena's adventure features an artifact called the Golden Bracelet, which the monsters need for unknown but presumably nefarious reasons. Taloon is on the hunt for a legendary weapon called the Zenithian Sword, which may be connected to the prophecy. And in Nara and Mara's episode, we learn about the Secret of Evolution, a mysterious ritual that can unlock a creature's true potential. Step by step, the horrifying plan comes together. A man named Sorrow seeks to awaken the long-slumbering ruler of evil and combine the Secret of Evolution with a golden bracelet to turn him into the ultimate being. Only the hero can prevent the calamity by gathering the 4 Zenithian relics and vanquishing the ruler of evil before he has a chance to perfect his ritual. Having the story told as a slowly unfolding mystery instead of being spoon-fed to you all at once adds a strong sense of discovery, keeping the narrative fresh throughout the game. Instead of participating in a series of unrelated fetch quests, you're uncovering a fiendish plot, gathering allies, and opposing the villain's efforts. And the fact that each of the first 4 chapters ends with unfinished business adds a strong sense of urgency to the overarching narrative. Long-running plot arcs build hype for future confrontations, making the rematch against Kilian, the defeat of Balzac in Santem Castle, and the epic battle with Estark in his subterranean palace feel much more epic. Plot points like using the Staff of Transform to masquerade as monsters while infiltrating the villain's castle are miles better integrated into the ongoing story than going halfway across the world to fetch peppers for the King of Portoga in return for a ship. And this sense of cohesion also greatly benefits from the fact that Dragon Quest IV has by far the strongest world building the series has seen thus far. Monsters are no longer just enemies you fight in dungeons, but NPCs in their own right. Healy and Duran are non-human allies that join the party. Sorrow's henchmen pop up all over the place, running errands for their evil master, and the Dire Palace is home to a whole tribe of colorful creatures. Key items like the Zenithian armor and the Pataquaya root are part of the world's history, and we finally see some gameplay elements incorporated into the story. Taloon helps a prisoner escape from jail by sneaking a wing of wyvern into his cell, and it's awesome to finally see the world tree after finding its leaves scattered throughout the previous worlds. But most of all, this is a world that changes as a direct consequence of your actions. When you first reach Frenar, the whole village is gathered around the inn to gawk at the princess that's supposedly staying inside. But things return to normal after you deal with the situation. The citizens of Endor never stop talking about how Princess Alina claimed victory in that recent tournament. And the ships stuck in Conanbur's harbor take to the sea once more after you clear out the lighthouse. Not to mention that the guy who asked for your help in getting rid of the monsters isn't just some random NPC, it's Taloon, whose wealth you personally accumulated in an earlier chapter. Dragon Quest IV has so many examples of this kind of lasting development, it's hard to limit myself to just a few. In Taloon's chapter alone, by the time it's over, you've repaired bridges, brokered a truce between warring kingdoms, moved your family across the country, purchased your own property and become a business owner, recovered and sold an ancient treasure, and commissioned a tunnel to link two subcontinents. And don't worry, I'm definitely going to talk about Taloon's chapter before we're done. Telling a cohesive story in a world that changes with the hero's actions is all well and good, but the mark of a truly great narrative is that it keeps the audience on their toes. The story needs its twists and turns, its surprise developments, and its unexpected setbacks. And as it happens, Dragon Quest IV has that going for it too. By the standards of 8-bit RPGs, Dragon Quest IV's plot is remarkably dynamic. I already mentioned the tournament sequence, but it's far from the only exciting scenario the story has to offer. To trick the monster that's been feeding on the people of Tempe, Princess Alina and her friends offer themselves up as sacrifice, only to jump out and surprise the hungry fiend when it comes for its snack. To speak with the prisoner in Bon Malmo's dungeons, Taloon has to sneak through the jail without being spotted by the guards, possibly the earliest genuine stealth sequence in a console RPG. And in Gardenburg Castle, you're arrested on charges of thievery and must prove your innocence by hunting down the real criminal while one of your companions languishes in a cell. But the story's most dynamic sequence is probably the resurrection of Estark. Disguising yourself as monsters and sneaking into the Dire Palace to spy on the villain's plans, you learn that the forgotten stronghold of the ruler of evil has resurfaced beneath Actempto mines. And even now, Estark slowly stirs from his long slumber. You then raise Sorrow and his henchmen to the bottom of the mines to dispatch the ruler of evil before his powers can be subverted by the villain. The story doesn't pull its punches either, having to hand the golden bracelet over to the bad guys in return for the safety of their unsuspecting accomplice, finally confronting Balzac only for his master to show up and put you in your place. Or in Sacrifice at Kilian Castle, these are all great little setbacks that raise the stakes and keep the story fresh. But it's not all doom and gloom. As you might expect from a Dragon Quest title, there's also a lot of comedy. Some of my favorite bits include the old priest in Conanburg who's trying to hit on a young girl by feeding her lines about how love has no age. The monster in the Great Lighthouse that casts Return, forgetting that it doesn't work indoors. and the shop in Foxville that sells broadswords for a measly 10 gold, only for them to turn into cypress sticks when the illusion lifts. And then there's this running gag about an adventuring party that keeps showing up wherever you go, telling you they don't have space for another person in Branca and competing for the treasure of the Cave of Padaquaya. Of course, I'd expected Dragon Quest IV to make me laugh. What I hadn't expected was for the game to make me care. One of the best subplots concerns the King of Stancia, who's promised a reward to the person who can make him laugh. It seems like a silly little story about an irresponsible despot who's toying with his subjects, but when you realize his true motivations, it's surprisingly profound. Times are tough, the world is under a pall of darkness, and there's monsters lurking everywhere. People need a reason to smile. The king didn't call for the contest for his own amusement, but to bring his people hope. In spite of the limited means with which it tells its story, Dragon Quest IV has remarkably strong writing, and it trickles down to even the most trivial of NPC dialogue. The two brothers vying for the same girl in Havel's tavern, the old man who stands at the pier gazing longingly at the ocean as he recalls his glory days in Endor's arena, the human prisoners in the dungeons of the Dire Palace who are desperately trying to stay thin so they'll get eaten last. It's simple stuff, but there's a core of real sincerity that runs through every line. Dragon Quest IV tells probably the best story I've experienced on an 8-bit console. I did not expect to feel so much for this game. I was on the edge of my seat during Princess Alina's campaign in the arena, and I felt genuinely bad when Orin stayed behind to help the sisters escape. But the scene that really got to me, the one that truly sold me on this story, is the introduction to the final chapter. Sorrow's attack on the hero's village is one of the best executed story sequences in a game from this era. The sense of tension and urgency as the monsters descend on the hidden community and you're ushered to safety is absolutely incredible. The choice to render the massacre using only the player's imagination was a brilliant one. As you hide in the cellar, you can hear your friends and family fighting and dying for your sake, feeling helpless and small. It's so much more impactful than anything they could have possibly shown on screen. And Celia's lore-appropriate sacrifice using the transform spell to take on the shape of the hero to trick the monsters into thinking you're dead is nothing short of a masterstroke. The death of your childhood friend puts a face to your loss. As short as this sequence is, I was genuinely moved by how it played out. It immediately and vividly captured my imagination and filled me with a lust for vengeance I've seldom felt for any villain in any RPG. Which brings us to our next topic. Let's talk about Dragon Quest IV's fantastic antagonist. Kefka, Sephiroth, Luca Blight. Within the canon of Japanese RPGs, there are certain villains that have achieved legendary status. These are some of the most memorable bad guys from the best-loved games of the genre, and they're justifiably brought up often in conversations about the greatest gaming villains of all time. But I'd never heard anyone talk about Dragon Quest IV's villain before playing the game, and I think that's kinda crazy. Dragon Quest IV's primary antagonist is Sorrow, a man, or maybe he's a monster man, or maybe he's just a monster. The game is kinda vague on that count. But what becomes increasingly clear throughout the story is the villain's intentions. Sorrow loathes humans, to the point where he's ready to revive the demonic ruler of evil, Estark, and unleash his hellish power upon the world. The source of Estark's power was the secret of evolution, a mysterious process of alchemy that grants control over life itself, allowing the user to transform themselves into the ultimate being. But Estark was never able to perfect this technique. It was only after his defeat that a powerful artifact called the Golden Bracelet was created, which holds the power to amplify dark energies, granting complete mastery of the secret of evolution. Over the course of the game, Sorrow manages to get his hands on the rediscovered secret of evolution and the Golden Bracelet. He initially intends to deliver them both to Estark, but after the heroes vanquish the ruler of evil, before his plan can come to fruition, Sorrow commits himself fully to his cause, using the secret of evolution, now incorporating the golden bracelet to turn himself into the ultimate being, Necrosaro. Sorrow is unlike any villain the series had had up until this point. Instead of the cackling manifestations of pure evil from the first 3 games, Sorrow is cool, attractive, and quietly menacing. An antagonist much more in line with the stylish bad guys of 90s anime. But Sorrow also differs in how he is used in the story. The previous villains mostly served as goalposts, a dark lord that's the cause of all that's wrong with the world and whose defeat would solve everything. Not to mention that by the time the quest began, all those bad things had already happened. Sorrow's menace is more of an ongoing problem, where earlier villains would be content to sit back and wait for the hero to show up on their doorstep. Sorrow actively drives the plot. We've already talked about the scene where he personally annihilates the hero's village, but he's also responsible for the theft of the golden bracelet, the abduction of Berlin's children, and the hostile takeover of Santine Castle. And as a natural consequence of his proactive behavior, you end up crossing paths with the villain time and again. Sorrow is also the first villain in the Dragon Quest series that comes with actual motivations. He doesn't just want to ruin the world for the lols, he's got a genuine grievance. His hatred of humans stems from the fact that they abused and eventually killed his closest friend, Rosa. You can get the gist of the story by visiting their hometown, but there's even more context to be found if you look hard enough. By sleeping at the inn in Izmit throughout Chapter 5, you'll unlock a series of cutscenes that tell the story of Rosa and Sorrow, and explain how he came to loathe humans. And to be honest, he's not wrong. Sorrow's journey comes to a head in the final battle, an absolutely fantastic bit of interactive storytelling. Estark was the first to discover the secret of evolution, but without the golden bracelet, he couldn't control it. Sorrow now has both. When we first face him, he looks exactly like Estark, and he's surprisingly weak. But as we dismantle him limb by limb, he starts to change, growing into the true, ultimate being. And the music is part of it too. The deliberate choice to start the battle using the same boss theme as against Estark in order to lull you into a false sense of security, but then unleash the true final battle theme only when Necrosaro assumes his ultimate form, was a brilliant one. A perfect send-off for a great villain. But it wasn't always meant to end this way. There's a hint of a possible redemption arc right before the final battle. Sorrow's lieutenant, Ramdevice, reveals that he was the one who ordered the abduction of Rosa in an effort to banish the last shreds of humanity from Sorrow's heart. And in fact, the attention given to Sorrow's character had a deeper purpose. In an interview with Famitsu from December of 1990, Horii revealed that the villain was originally planned to be redeemed midway through the story and join the companions on their quest. But due to time constraints, they weren't able to move ahead with this idea. Even so, Sorrow is arguably the best villain in a Japanese RPG up until this point, and easily my favorite character from the first 4 games. And I'm convinced the only reason he isn't more famous is because he belongs to an era of gaming before the medium reached a level of sophistication that allowed for the kind of iconic scenes that would burn the names and faces of video game antagonists into our brainstems. If Sorrow had had his day in the 16-bit era, we'd still be talking about him to this day. With all this focus on predefined characters and complex plot, it might seem like the game has strayed pretty far from its role-playing roots. But that is not true at all, because Dragon Quest IV includes one of the purest role-playing experiences I've ever had in a console RPG. It's often said that many modern video games that bear the title RPG are not actually role-playing experiences. Sure, they let you gain levels, unlock skills, learn spells, and acquire increasingly powerful arms and armor. But when the story is something you watch unfold without making any meaningful choices about what to do and, even more importantly, who you are, is it really a role-playing game? But role-playing can be defined as taking on the role of another person. And while we often think of character creation as being an essential element of that experience, it's far from a requirement. In fact, any definition of role-playing that doesn't include assuming the role of a predefined character is obviously wrong. And in that sense, Dragon Quest IV is most certainly a role-playing game. In the story's third chapter, you play as Torneko Taloon, a struggling merchant from the remote village of Lakanaba. Taloon is no hero or adventurer, at least at first. He's a family man with a wife and kid, and to support his family, he works at the local weapons shop. And true to the spirit of role-playing, you actually get to experience what that life is like. Each morning, you head to the shop and get behind the counter. All day long, as customers come and go, you answer questions about the merchandise, buy and sell weapons, and occasionally haggle over the price. In the evening, your boss hands you your commission, and off you go to rest and prepare for another day. But Taloon isn't content to remain a wage slave for the rest of his life. He wants to have his own weapons shop. So your goal in this chapter is to amass 35,000 gold in order to buy a suitable property. Of course, there's story beats to go through. A bridge that must be repaired by liberating a famous architect from a village of fox spirits. A peace treaty to be brokered between two bickering kings. But the core of Taloon's chapter is all about entrepreneurship. For a console game of its time, you have an astounding amount of freedom in how to go about this goal. You can spend your days at the weapons shop in Lakanaba, slowly but surely building up a nest egg. But just as in real life, the employment route leaves much to be desired when it comes to getting rich fast. To speed up the process, you might venture into the field to fight monsters, trade with wandering merchants, raid dungeons for treasure, and buy and sell weapons and armor. This objective is supported by a number of unique game mechanics. Aside from the shop in Lakanaba, there's also a government official in Bon Malmo who buys armor at premium prices due to a shortage. Later, officials at Endor offer a commission if you can fill a work order of weapons and armor for the castle guards. And once you raise the money to get your own shop, you can really start to rake in the cash. Especially since your wife is an absolute genius at sales. But Taloon's chapter isn't all about these new mechanics that are unique to him. Far from it. There's still an overworld to explore, towns and dungeons to discover, and monsters to fight. But even here, some of the rules are slightly different. To begin with, Taloon has a far greater chance of getting worthwhile treasure from monsters, giving you another means to supply your shop. And as an itinerant trader, Taloon doesn't just encounter monsters on the overworld, but also fellow merchants and even innkeepers. And he doesn't have to face his challenges entirely alone. True to the theme of entrepreneurship, Taloon can hire a pair of mercenaries, a soldier and a pilgrim, by paying them gold. Last but far from least, Taloon also has the world's best wife. Nita takes care of the kid and runs the weapons shop once you have it, keeps a bed made and dinner warm for when you need a rest, doesn't nag you if you come back at all hours of the night or stay away for days on end, and even sends you out with a packed lunch each morning. It's pretty much a medical herb, but you can really feel the love. Granted, there still isn't much depth to these game systems. Shops all have the same prices, there's no mechanic for supply and demand, wandering merchants don't offer any real deals, and bargaining with customers is just luck of the draw. And sure, the shopkeeping experience gets pretty repetitive, but I honestly feel like that's kinda the point. It's a perfect simulation of the drudgery of a 9 to 5, and I think a lot of us can empathize with feeling stuck in the daily grind and working towards something more. It's easy to see the flaws today, but back then I'm sure I would have been blown away by the opportunity to walk into a shop and stand on the other side of the counter for once. Taloon's chapter is role-playing in its finest form, and I can only imagine how fun this must have been back in 1990. Whether you love it or hate it, Taloon's chapter was incredibly innovative, and it serves as the perfect emblem for what Dragon Quest IV was all about. This is a game that wanted to surprise you. A game that wanted to blow you away with stuff you'd never seen. So it's no wonder Dragon Quest IV was a huge success. By 1990, the market for console RPGs was getting crowded. The Final Fantasy series was already gearing up for its third release. Other challengers included Mother, the Phantasy Star series, and Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei. Even handheld gamers could now have a taste of RPG goodness through Akitoshi Kawazu's Makai Toshi Saga for the Game Boy, known in the West as Final Fantasy Legend. But as successful as these contenders were, in Japan, Dragon Quest was still the undisputed champion of the RPG. Dragon Quest III had been a runaway phenomenon, famously causing mass hysteria upon its release. Anticipation for the sequel was no less immense. I could quote sales figures, mention the dense news coverage, the aggressive marketing campaigns. But there are no numbers that could possibly convey just how hotly anticipated this title truly was, better than the following anecdote. In a 1989 interview, Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto admitted that if it came down to it, he would delay the release of his upcoming game so it wouldn't compete with the launch of Dragon Quest IV. In Miyamoto's own words, once Dragon Quest fever sets in, this year is done for. That game was The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. In an era where physical distribution was more or less the only distribution, factories had to work overtime to produce enough cartridges to meet demand. Upon release, Dragon Quest IV sold a staggering 1.3 million copies within the first hour of its release. And that still left plenty of disappointed customers. The game would eventually go on to sell a total of 3.1 million copies in Japan. Less than the third game, but still an incredible number for the 1990s. Many of the game's characters became fan favorites. The sisters Nara and Mara, known as Maya and Mina these days, are iconic enough that even people who haven't played the series can still recognize them. Taloon, better known in Japan by his surname Torneko, became Dragon Quest's first genuine celebrity with the release of Torneko's Great Adventure in 1993, the first ever entry in the Mystery Dungeon series of roguelikes. Princess Elena got her own 5-volume manga in 1997, expanding the story of her Chapter 2 adventure with new characters, locations, and scenarios. And the villain Sorrow even went on to star in his own game, 33 years after his original appearance, when he was cast as the main protagonist of Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince from 2023. While Dragon Quest IV helped stoke the series' immense popularity in Japan, it couldn't do much to change Dragon Quest's destiny in the West. The game, retitled Dragon Warrior 4, only made it to North America in October of 1992, when most children hungry for fantasy adventures had already moved on to the Super Nintendo, and titles like Final Fantasy IV, ActRaiser, and, ironically, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Dragon Warrior 4 sold around 80,000 copies in North America, barely a blip on the radar at a time when popular NES games routinely sold over 1 million copies on the Western market. And you can kinda tell Enix of America were ready to move on. While the game itself made it to the West pretty much intact, the manual that came with it is super lazy. It's only 36 pages compared to the 200 of the Japanese original, lacks essential information like equipment lists, and is chock full of misinformation. As popular as Dragon Quest IV was in Japan, it took a relatively long time for another version of the game to see the light of day. While the first 3 titles were remade for the Super Famicom in the mid-90s, Dragon Quest IV had to wait until the new millennium before getting a second chance at life. The first major remake was released on November 22, 2001 for the PlayStation, using the same game engine as Dragon Quest VII, released the previous year. The new version had more advanced graphics, higher quality sound, and an updated user interface. Notable gameplay changes include the addition of the bag, first introduced in Dragon Quest V, which finally allows for a shared party inventory, a pioneer town that can be developed over the course of the game, a prologue that introduces the hero before Chapter 1, as well as a 6th chapter that continues the story with a new ending, a bonus dungeon, additional bosses, and the possibility to recruit the game's villain Sorrow into your party. And perhaps most important of all, there is now a tactical setting that lets you manually control the entire party, giving you the option to entirely forgo AI control. A North American release was initially planned, but this fell through when the game's developer, Heartbeat, apparently decided to take a sabbatical from game development, from which they never recovered. The PlayStation version later made its way onto other platforms, without significant changes. A version for the Nintendo DS came out in 2007, and it was eventually ported to iOS and Android in 2014. And with the positive reception the recent HD 2D remakes of the Erdrick trilogy received, I think we can safely say there's probably gonna be another remake of Dragon Quest IV in the near future. In modern times, Dragon Quest has earned a reputation as the safe series of Japanese RPGs, the comfortable, never-changing stalwart of the genre that can be relied upon to defend the pillars of that particular brand of game. But things weren't always that way. In the Famicom era, each Dragon Quest title stood on the cutting edge of innovation in console gaming, and Dragon Quest IV was no exception. In many ways, this was the most ambitious, most risky move Nakamura and Horii ever made. Before I go on, I just want to say, if you enjoyed this video, I'd be super grateful if you could hit the like button and leave a quick comment, as it really helps the video reach more people. I read every comment I get, no matter how old the video is. And if you want to support me, consider subscribing to my channel so I know people want to see more videos like this. After fully realizing their dream of a console RPG that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the luminaries of PC gaming like Ultima and Wizardry, Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura wanted to break away from familiar ground to try something new. The result was Dragon Quest IV, the Great Experiment, a hugely ambitious, well ahead of its time console RPG that rolled a swathe of amazing innovations into the tried and true formula. Using artificial intelligence to rule the hero's allies was a technological marvel for its time. It might not have been the best fit for a series built around player skill and nitty-gritty decision-making, but it had a huge impact on the entire industry. Today, the idea of controlling only a single character at a time while the AI handles the rest is pretty much the standard, especially in action-focused RPGs. And games like Final Fantasy XII made an entire business out of programming the behavior of your computer-controlled allies. The casino, with its wide selection of minigames to play and great prizes to win, became the prototype for the kind of elaborate optional content we've come to expect from Japanese RPGs. And the idea of a roster of characters that could be swapped out not just between battles but in the middle of combat would form the cornerstone of games like Final Fantasy X. Other innovations, like a greatly reduced need for grinding and a stronger focus on story, were at the forefront of genre trends at the time. And Dragon Quest IV's chapter structure provided a model for later titles like Octopath Traveler and Live Alive. And yet, for all these changes, Dragon Quest IV still feels quintessentially Dragon Quest. It's an incredibly solid iteration on everything that made these games so great in the first place, and a fantastic capstone to the Famicom era of this series. Dynamic, well-integrated scenarios, great characters, and the subtle touch of Horii's masterful writing make the story a huge leap forward. The Caravan adds a ton of complexity to party management, and getting to bring it inside a few of the game's dungeons is an absolute treat. Towns are varied and interesting to explore, the dungeons vastly more elaborate, and treasure hunting is more exciting than ever thanks to small medals. Piecing the world together after only seeing bits and glimpses in the first 4 chapters is super satisfying. Working out the villain's plans from hints throughout the story is a lot of fun, and helping Taloon turn 100 gold per day into a massive fortune is the epitome of rags to riches goodness. Sure, there's a bit less freedom in how to approach the quest, and the inclusion of artificial intelligence was a big drawback for me personally, but I still had an absolute blast playing this game. There were plenty of moments that surprised and excited me along the way, And as the final cutscene rolled around and the 8 companions were deposited back to their respective homes, I found myself, for the first time with this series, genuinely invested in what would become of the heroes. It's still a far cry from the kind of elaborate stories we'd come to expect from this genre, but for its time, this is just brilliant. As the last Famicom game in the series, Dragon Quest IV was the end of an era. But in the grand scale of the Dragon Quest series, it was only the beginning. Because in choosing to chronicle the lives and destinies of specific characters, Dragon Quest had found a new model to follow, and the next game in the series would take this principle to even greater heights. But that's a story for another time. Anyway, I'm just some guy on YouTube, and these are just my personal opinions. Whether you agree or disagree, I'd love to hear about your experiences with Dragon Quest IV in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.